What wedding moment made you think, they are not going to last long? She told me 2 days before that she found her fiancé annoying, and that she didn't like him, and that he was awful in bed. She was visibly, endlessly uncomfortable at the rehearsal wedding dinner combo. Then she sobbed the entire morning, day of. She ended up not getting any makeup done 'cause she wouldn't stop sobbing, and refused to get dressed, stalling the wedding approximately 35 minutes. She then said 45 minutes of vows that she had prepared. 9 pages of things like inappropriate vows to friends and family, his parents and sisters, none of them her husband, and then almost didn't say I do. Managed to get yeah, okay. Yeah, I do out of her almost a full 60 seconds after she was supposed to say anything. I could go on for hours. But it was the most painful and awkward wedding I've ever been to. I've got my money on 10 months. We're 1 month in. I was maid of honor, me. Best man and the couple went into a separate little room to do the signing stuff. Bride excused herself to go to the bathroom, and the groom started making pretty mean remarks about her cooking something she's passionate about to the officiary. She came back, heard they were talking about cooking family meals together, and gave him the warmest smile. Thinking he had praised her, he scoffed awkwardly and changed the topic. That always stuck with me. He wasn't laughing with her, but at her, behind her back. They lasted 7 months. A fun light-hearted dance with the groom followed by a close and slow dance with her male best friend. How long did that marriage last? 18 months, and now she's living with the friend. He ended up at the emergency room between the ceremony and the reception. He went out the night before with his sister and friends and got plastered. They had to hold a cold pack to the back of his neck to keep him vertical during the wedding photos. Marriage lasted 30 days until they had a fight. She left the house and he filled the U-Haul truck with everything but her clothes. When the bride drank vodka out of a pint glass and spent a significant amount of time making out with another guy on the dance floor. When the bride tried to playfully feed the groom some cake, pulling it back once it got close to his mouth, the 3rd time she did this. He slapped it out of her hand and stormed off. In the ensuing awkward silence and wide-eyed staring, we all knew it wouldn't last. Surprisingly, they were together for nearly 2 years before the bride eloped away with her stepbrother. No one saw that coming. Wedding videographer here. I think my favorite moment was when I was sitting at the miscellaneous table with all the randoms, and the girl next to me, the groom's ex, drunkenly admitted to sleeping with the groom a few months prior. The bachelor party and the bachelorette party were in Vegas at the same time, across the hall from each other. The bride and groom got in a huge fight on the last night of the trip, and when I was leaving I said I'll see you guys at the wedding to the groom, and he replied I'm not sure there's gonna be one. There was a wedding, but they were divorced within 18 months I believe. When the groom ran up and punched the bride during the reception, in some kind of drunken melee. 2 friends of mine got married, and when they gave their vows, the guy started laughing at the part about being faithful. Oops. The groom had a best woman instead of a best man. Nothing wrong with that. But her toast left the whole room in awkward silence because she was clearly in love with him. Portuguese wedding. Fist fight broke out at the head table during the reception between 2 groomsmen. They were arguing about which of them had slept with the bride first. Groom was oblivious. He came home from work early one day 2 years later and caught her in bed with another man. Surprised it took that long. Midnight buffet was amazing though. When the groom started off his speech by saying, "We all know I didn't want to get married, but we're here for bride and child we had together _ 1 year, 3 months later they were finished." When he raised his eyebrows and gave her a knowing look. During the 4 richer, or for poorer portion of their vows. For context, he was a newly drafted pro athlete and she was a big fan of his signing bonus. When they disappeared for half an hour during the reception, they were both saving themselves for marriage and were desperate to bone down, which is a fine thing to want. But it turns out that was more or less the main reason they got married. They made it almost a year. The part of the vows where you pledge monogamy. The audience laughed. My husband was the best man at a wedding. The bride was a nightmare, not just during the wedding, but in general everyday life. All of the friends hated her, and she had no friends of her own. We knew it was doomed when, during the portraits, the bride was making everyone miserable as can be. The groom said exact words, "I'll just send her to therapy, and, if that doesn't work, we can just get divorced." The groom took the stupid cake thing to an extreme. The bride had given him his bite, and mushed a little on his chin or nose. He then took a piece and mashed it into her face so hard that I was expecting her to end up with a bloody nose. Cake and frosting got up her nose, in her eyes, down the front of her dress, etc. The bride had to go get cleaned up, had her makeup redone, and was ugly crying within an hour of saying, "I do." He didn't care. His third wedding. Same venue and same after-ceremony driving away vehicle as the first two. My wife is an event planner, with a particular talent for higher-end weddings. I'm talking about $150,000 and up for the reception venue, catering, decor, music alone. The best I've heard from her is the following. Bride and her mother were discussing terms of the prenuptial agreement on the day of the wedding while doing hair and makeup. Something about a 1-year clause after which the terms eased, and the bride could exit the marriage with a nice payout. So I guess the marriage lasted at least a year. The most beautiful wedding I've been to ended in divorce. Venue was where the groom's father is buried and he cried as he made his vows to the bride there. Turned out he'd been cheating on her for months, and they divorced a while later. Something so repugnant about marrying someone you're cheating on practically over your father's grave. To date, it's the only wedding I've been to that ended in divorce. The groom and best man had a dancing routine for getting into the church ceremony, and they got nearly halfway through it. And I guess the groom felt they hadn't received much applause and wows from us the attendees and decided to go back to the entrance and start all over. Sigh. Had an old boss who was divorced. He told me once I should have known it wasn't going to last, when the only happy moment I had on my wedding day was when I snuck out to smoke weed with my buddies in the parking lot. When we had to pay $35 for the paperwork to be filed. Courthouse wedding, and he spent the rest of the day complaining about the waste of money. They got secretly married at the local town hall, out of spite to the girl's father, who did not agree with the relationship. This happened right out of high school, and they divorced during my sophomore year at college. Not the couple getting married, but the best man and maid of honor, who are married to each other. Best man's speech was all about how hard it was to be married. I've been married for a year, and it feels like 100 years. Maid of honor stands up to give a speech and just says ditto. It was so awkward and really brought the whole room down. Brother of the bride stood up and gave a nice impromptu speech about teamwork and having a partner to go through life with. How happy the family was to have the groom join their family. Best man and maid of honor were divorced within a year. Couple who got married are still married 30 years later. I sometimes wonder if the speeches actually were helpful in how not to act as a couple. One of my good friends got married, and I'd never met her before the wedding because she's just shy on the wedding day. She was belligerently drunk before the ceremony even started, and couldn't even get through the lines she was supposed to repeat, i.e., "I promise to love you." She ended up slapping the groom, spilling champagne on her dress, and then crying under a table while he tried to comfort her. They lasted about 4 months. Another one was my wife's friend. She's a very conservative, religious white girl who married a black man. Most of her racist family didn't approve of the marriage and didn't show up. But she planned the whole marriage around race, like a vanilla cake for her and a chocolate cake for him. The wedding colors were black and white, and even the meals were white meat for her side and dark meat for his. It was extremely uncomfortable as a guest. They lasted 2 years, but broke up because he was abusive and almost killed her, rather than the weird racial tension. I'm a wedding photographer and I have a few of these. When a very young, not dating long couple say things like the partner is perfect and we never fight. When there's name calling, I particularly cringed at it because we so get each other and are so comfortable that he can call me dumb slut as a nickname. They didn't last the year. One where the wedding was all about the groom promoting his band. He even sang his bride a song that was literally just him showing off his vocal range. With some classic piece, she stood up and joined him on stage halfway through, and he looked annoyed that he had to share the limelight. They lasted about 2 years. He was sleeping with the other vocalist in the band. I was kindly included in a last-minute +1 to the wedding of a family friend who I'd never met before. At the rehearsal dinner, or the German equivalent, the Polder bent, the guests smashed ceramic and porcelain items on the ground. I was fresh in Germany, so this was all pretty out of context and frightening. But my boyfriend explained that it's a tradition, reminding the couple that life is sometimes difficult and you have to work together to clean it up. The bride kind of half-heartedly motioned to the groom to sweep it up. He did a little bit, then just moved on to talk to his friends, leaving most of the shards strewn around the yard. Additionally, I don't think I saw the couple talk to each other once over the next 3 days of celebrations. It was a gorgeous wedding, and I'm so grateful that I was invited. Really good way to begin living in a new country. But it wasn't surprising to hear that they divorced a few years later. I worked at a nice restaurant in Nola. Bride is lovely. She is excited and very receptive to our suggestions on things in their budget. Groom is an insufferable know-it-all, has bargain hunting. Crab cakes don't cost that much. What if I buy them and you serve them? On their big day, I'm holding the door as they walk out the first time as husband and wife. W. We got married. I'm so happy. H. Not really. We gotta fill out paperwork and file it with the state. I've seen 3-week-old balloons less deflated than that poor woman. I hope she got out of there. When the maid of honor professed her love for my brother during her toast at my brother's wedding, and her husband walked up to the head table, picked her up and carried her away. Before she could embarrass him further, they lasted about 3 months after that. My brother and his wife, on the other hand, are still happily married 20 years later. Not at the wedding itself, but when my spouse and I went to pick up our marriage license, we encountered a young man shouting at his fiancée outside the building because she had failed to remind him to bring the right IDs. We were like, big yikes. I hope they're doing okay. They were both so drunk they were slurring during the vow exchange. After the wedding, my friend's new wife, who was fairly quiet in public, was screaming at my friend's family, telling them it was the last time they would be seeing them and how terrible they were. It was hard to watch. 2 years later, my friend walked in on her and a dude. That was that. At my wedding, she paused for a long second before saying yes. The woman marrying us was like, oh, she's thinking about it. She laughed it off and said yes. We lasted 3, almost 4 years married. Wedding photographer here. I can think of a few. Full-blown row during dinner. Had another couple fist fight during a first dance. An infamous one for me was leaving a venue late one night, and as I'm walking to the train, I can see the bride down an alley, on her knees with the best man. I was the wedding photographer for a reality TV show, End of the night, I'm having a few drinks with the film crew, and the groom has come up to me and one of the producers and says, I think I've made a big mistake. So, we're trying to be reassuring and telling him it's natural to second-guess such a big decision, to which he replies no. I mean, I think I'm gay. I had them both on Facebook. The drama the next week was mesmerizing to watch unfold. The groom showed up to his own reception, wearing a t-shirt with restroom sign-style stick figures depicting a bride, and groom caption "Game over." Prior to my wedding, I'd asked my husband to practice dancing with me because I'm uncoordinated due to a disability. He blew me off and said we'd be fine. As we were dancing, he spoke in my ear, not even quietly, "What are you doing? What's wrong with you? You're embarrassing me." We lasted 2 years. Leaving was the best decision I ever made. I worked at a museum that also doubled as a wedding venue in the summers, as part of the wedding package. The museum would stay open after hours for the guests only, so I'd just sit there and greet people basically. One wedding got particularly rowdy. Almost everyone was drunk. People were jumping into the fountain. Someone vomited in said fountain. At one point, the bride is crying. Turns out the groom and one of his groomsmen were screwing upstairs in one of the bathrooms. A fight ensued between the groom and the father of the bride, and cops were called because it really got ugly. Entertaining for me, but I felt so bad for the bride. The entire bridal party, including parents of the wedded couple, entering into a betting pool of how long the marriage would last. At the wedding reception, Ark the best man won. Price is Right rules at 14 months. When he smashed the cake in her face and hair, then went off drinking with his buddies. In 12 weeks, she filed. Good thing I didn't buy an expensive gift. One of my friends got married. Afterwards she looked at me, crying, and said, "What did I do?" They were separated by the time the plane landed from their honeymoon. He was a good guy. She was a mess. The betta fish in the flower centerpieces lasted longer than the marriage. I was at a wedding when a phone went off during the ceremony. In the middle of exchanging vows, it was the groom's. He took the call. They are divorced now. I believe it was a cousin calling to ask if they were late for the wedding. He complained she was mean to him throughout their dating life. The day before the wedding, all of the groomsmen and the groom's friends told him not to marry the girl, like straight up. They lasted less than a year. Not at the wedding itself, but I used to work at a David's bridal. Bride came in with tons of friends. We did the say yes to the dress thing. And an hour later, she'd standing there in $3,000 worth of stuff and doesn't have any money with her or in her account. She decides she wants to apply for the store credit card. I run it through the system, and she gets denied. She then calls the groom for his info, which, to be fair, people did all the time, and he tells her no. She threw a huge fit on the phone with him, standing on the bridal stage, literally demanding why not. Why? Like an actual child over and over again. I've never seen a 30-year-old age backwards so quickly. She was just a brat, literally stomping her feet in front of me, all her friends, and the other bride in the store. I was embarrassed. At the end of all of that, she hangs up on him and her friend is like, "I'm so sorry, you can't get your dress." And the bride stops crying instantly and just goes, "Oh, I'll get the dress. I just have to do this at home, and when he gets mad enough he'll come get it for me, so I'll stop." Speechless. Sure enough, girl came back 2 days later with her man, and he applied for the credit card and bought the dress. He was livid and silent, and she was smug as hell. Can't imagine they're having a happy marriage if they are still together. Showed up to the wedding of a friend of my husband's, who I knew casually. When we arrived at the church, the groom was very drunk in the parking lot, and getting drunker by the minute. I thought it was kinda nuts since it was a full Catholic ceremony. which involved lots of kneeling and standing. I honestly have no idea how he made it thought that, but he did. At the reception, he proceeded to continue the drinking party, while his new wife cried in the washroom. When it was time for the first dance, he kind of stumbled around the dance floor. Despite a year of dance lessons, when it was time for him to take his new wife's garter off and throw it to the bachelors, he instead did a striptease type dance and got himself down to his underwear. In front of many elderly family members, people were shocked and talking, and all in all it was a **** show. I gave this marriage a year or two tops. They, however, are still married 25 plus years later.